This is Notice Me Game Dev, how I learned to hate hiring, entering, and navigating game dev, and you can too by JXer. That's me. All right, so let's jump into it. For context, I'm currently in the games industry. I've worked in games for 15 years. Now it's 15 plus. I'm actually going to be heading towards 16 years. My experience has stretched from indie games, mobile games of small to extremely large budgets, what would be called AA development and AAA studios. Nice missing the space there. Within the industry, I have occupied entry level, junior, mid, senior, senior two, and multiple leadership positions from team lead and art lead to art director. I also am currently a principal artist. If you don't know what those mean, welcome to the talk. We're going to get into it. Prior to that, I worked in comics, freelance concepts, and illustration, some of which was for large studios. So really just 14 years of overlapping freelance with over 15 years of video game development experience that had a pretty solid range. Currently, I work in mobile games. This is mostly from a US perspective, focuses more on art jobs and game dev than anything else, though a lot of information may be able to cross-pollinate. This information is from my experience and is in no way meant to be exacting and taken as concrete advice. It is simply for your consideration. That's very important. I don't want to hear any, but he said it'd be exactly like this. It's not going to be that way. All right. Welcome. This is me learning Google Slides. Chapter 1. What roles to apply for? Typically, you want to aim for a specific role. While many game dev jobs expect folks to wear multiple hats, roles will define what they ask for. It's much easier to get hired if you fit into that role rather than selling yourself as a jack of all trades, even if you are. Being well-rounded counts for a lot more if you're working on a small indie game team. So basically, this means you won't have to be like specifically, oh, I'm a UI UX forever. But when you're looking for a job at a bigger studio, it really helps if you're kind of understanding what your focus is. Like, oh, I want to work specifically in concept. I want to work specifically in this or that. General rules, the bigger the company or team, the more likely they will want specialization. Know your level of experience. Keep in mind the level of expertise when applying for a job, requesting a specific level of experience. If they're specialized, make sure you're a good fit. Really, that's just what gets kind of tossed around is apply for everything. A lot of times people then get disappointed and they're like, oh, I got 30 rejections. And when I see their applications, they basically were shooting for the moon and they had been doing development skill related whatever for like a year or less. They really didn't know what they were doing and they weren't at a skill level to reach like a high senior position. So just be realistic. And if you aren't sure what that looks like, have conversations with people like myself and other people who have worked in there that can maybe give you a bit better idea. Team sizes. Understand that smaller indie teams expect more wide weight to be carried. That means you're going to be doing a lot more that's less specialized, like we were talking about earlier. Can be done with a small amount of people, kind of a given. High risk, possibly high reward. The idea is the team is smaller and you make millions. Those millions are probably going to get split in a better ratio. In larger studios, you know, you're not really going to be seeing the millions. And honestly, in small indie teams, you're probably not going to see millions ever anyway, but you can affect the game the most. You have the most agency usually in a smaller team because you're going to be carrying more, but you have more say. Tends to have the lowest long-term job security. That's a kind of a weird one that people just assume right now. AAA is very volatile. It is true. You're likely to get laid off. But indie teams don't last that long when they're actually like a team. It's a small business, and if the game flops and the budgeting disappears, the team dissolves and you hop onto another team. It doesn't get talked about a lot that I see in my circles, but it's very important to remember that that's actually one of the lowest secure jobs that you could have is on an indie team. In fact, you're likely to not even get paid while developing in a lot of cases. So just keep in mind that the risk is very, very high, but you're also probably more likely to be passionate about what you're doing and be able to turn that passion into action. AAA teams. Want to specialize. That's what we were talking about earlier, right? You're less likely to be wearing all the hats. You're more likely to be you concept people or you concept sci-fi guns. Mitigate your risk by getting benefits, salary, PTO, and sometimes bonuses. It's just generally provided by companies. We'll get into that later. Do projects that are impossible with a small amount of people. I mean, you're not going to make WoW with 5 people, right? That's really what it is. You're not going to make a huge MMO or some AAA project with 3 people. Lower risk, but reward is predetermined. Your salary, if you our salary, is going to be pretty much the same. And if you get bonuses, those may vary. But right now, bonuses are trending to be lower over time rather than higher. And while those may be performance related of the product, not just you, it's generally within a range. You're not going to suddenly go, oh, we did great this year. I tripled my salary. You can affect the game the least. I did put usually, because again, it's not always this way, but in AAA, you're probably going to be staying in your lane. You're probably going to be using your voice against a lot of other people's voices. It's not unlikely to have multiple discipline leads that are going to be kind of telling you what you're doing, what your place is, where it goes. And for some people, this is actually better because you're able to focus, you understand, this is what I do, and you don't really have to worry about all these other things. That's why this is under what roles to apply for. You should be considering all of these things and kind of determining, you don't need to know the answer to all of it, but determining, is this what I'm looking for? Job security is still the highest, even with the risk of layoffs. I know it's counterintuitive, got into that a moment ago, but it really is. AAA is still going to be trying to hire you at least for the length of a project, generally, which can span between 2+ years. Live service is a little bit different. We'll get into that later. AA teams land pretty much between the first two, likely have more predetermined reward. AA is just budget talk. So if single A is more like indie studio and AAA is your Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed, crazy, what have yous, this is kind of more like when Hades came out and Supergiant. That's kind of where that is. They're functioning with a decent amount of team, probably going to have ongoing work. They're known, but yeah, that's where that sits. Mobile teams can vary greatly in size from tiny to huge. They do trend smaller. The goal of a mobile team is to kind of get as much bang as you can out of as few people as possible, because they will shotgun their budgets into what they hope is a quick project that makes a very high return. Mobile space is very metrics and money focused. Their goal is to kind of fit into a slot that's working right now within whatever economy and just make as much as possible, usually through in-game purchases. They can run a gamut from feeling indie to AAA. I've experienced this personally. I've had a very small mobile team, and then I've had a big one. Right now I'm on like a medium, but we have a AAA budget. So it feels kind of like a tighter, smoother working AAA team, the way I'm working right now. They tend to focus on live service and clone games. Live service is simply the game is ongoing, you're adding content, and there is a rotation. A live service game example that's on console would be like Destiny, Puzzles and Dragons on mobile, stuff like that, where you're going to constantly be doing events, making new things, and rotating it out, and the expectation is that your player base is going to continue spending money. When I worked on Hearthstone, that's a live service game, usually called a treadmill, because it's just never going to end, and you're constantly taking things on and taking things off. Clone games are what they sound like. Oh, hey, Clash of Clans did really good. We're making Clash of Clans now, and you just hope that you ride the coattails and make the rest of their money, essentially. Solo dev is crazy, and you can kind of do whatever, so my talk won't apply to this. I'm sorry. Good luck. Solo dev is awesome, but it's such a risk, and it's such a different talk. I would love if somebody else were to take that mantle and run with it and maybe do a talk about solo dev, but it won't be me, because I've dabbled, but this is not my area of expertise. Be interested. You don't have to, but please be interested in what you're looking to do, at least some extent. I have run into so many people that go into game dev and they're just like, well, they're in love with the idea of being in games or doing it, but they're not really interested in any of the work. Good luck if that's you. I hope it's not. Square peg, round hole. Some studios expect an emulation of a house style. So if you do Spider-Man comics, Blizzard probably isn't looking for this, so you may want to rework either what you do or what you're looking for, because one of those isn't going to fit and it will need to adjust. T-pose. For large studio game dev, consider being what is referred to as a T-shaped developer. You have a wide spread of ability or knowledge, that's the arms out to the side, but you go deep and specialize in one skill set, which is the rest of the figure going downwards. This would be like, oh, I'm a 3D artist and I specialize in organic and hard surface, but I also do concepting and drawing and painting on the side. So that would be your kind of wide area, but your specifics would be the 3D. This is something that actually was pretty well known that Valve was doing back in 2010 around Orange Box release, where they didn't want to hire any 2D artists. They specifically wanted 2D artists that could also do 3D. They wanted to kind of cover a range. So you'd still have your specialized area, but they wanted to know they could rely on you to execute kind of fully through the pipeline. What's a pipeline? We'll get into that later. Gotta go fast. Senior roles and above expect you to be able to hit the ground running and won't be expecting to train you in your discipline beyond familiarizing you with their studio and specific pipelines. Basically, this is kind of what I was talking about, level of experience. Just know that the more senior you are, the more expectations they're going to have when you come in. They're going to expect you to be able to kind of just start up and understand and not get trained up. When I started in Hearthstone, I was a senior too, and they basically talked to me like I was in management. They're like, okay, if our manager were to croak, you will be the one in charge and you will understand already kind of how we do things. And if you don't, you already are capable of understanding how to understand those things. So just realize, don't be intimidated by senior roles if you have experience already. Just kind of familiarize yourself with a lot of what that means before you go shotgunning for those roles, because that can cause problems we'll get into later. Not just the cash. Don't choose a job based only off of what the pay is without paying mind to the responsibilities and required skill sets. The point of a job is to make money, but if you're just going to lose it in a month later, it goes against the point. So right, if you're like, wow, this job pays 200 grand, I'm going to apply for it, and you happen to get it, but you know for a fact you can't really do the work, you're not going to keep that job very long. And if you do, you're going to cause so many problems that you're going to make your life and other people's lives a living hell. This doesn't mean don't shoot for the moon. It means just be objective and be realistic. That's all. I say definitely go for higher paying jobs. And if you're unsure, buff your skill set up a little bit. Just don't go like, just whatever you can get, because this isn't freelance. This isn't where you can get paid a lot and you kind of know what they're coming to you for. There is a very heavy expectation in higher level studio game dev, and it will send waves through the rest of that spider web in a way that you might not have been able to predict. Aimless carpet bombing. Folks will tell you to shotgun your resume to any job just in case, but this will waste a lot of your time. Try to be at least slightly intentional, and that word's going to come up a lot. Companies also dislike when you're clearly just throwing your resume to see what sticks, and this can ruin future opportunities for you there. That last part, it doesn't always play out that way. Sometimes, if you come back with a really kick-ass portfolio, you might not even be talking to the same person who saw your stuff before, but it is something to keep in mind. The other side of that is you really will be wasting your time if you're doing the Spider-Man comic and applying to Blizzard. Like I said, you want to be intentional. You want to kind of be like, is this a good match? You want it to be a good match because that's better for everybody in the long run and the likely longevity of your role should you land it. Open opportunities. Let's try that again. Open to opportunities. Don't turn your nose up at a job listing simply because it doesn't sound like rock star work or isn't with one of the largest companies everyone has heard of. Great opportunities come in many packages. I see this a lot. A lot of people will go like, my dream is this big studio, and I go for it. But sometimes, the more specific that dream is, the less likely it is to take that specific shape. I'm working one of the best jobs I've ever worked in my entire over 15-year career right now, and it is absolutely a job I never would have taken 10 years ago. I it sounded weird. I wasn't sure about it. It ended up being a great fit. The pay is better than I've ever been paid before, and I have a lot more life satisfaction working this job. And it's at a company that, if I even tell anybody, nobody will have heard of. So, it's not to say that the rock star work or the large companies are bad. It's just, if you're really, especially not getting responses to your applications, just widen that range a little bit and see what else fits, and don't turn your nose up at like a mobile company that has a track record of 8+ years, but you haven't heard of them, but you can tell that they're pretty stable, that kind of thing. It might end up being a great job, and you might be part of the reason they end up getting heard of more. You never know. No right answer. This is a fun one, right? There's no correct choice. You need to figure out what the best fit is for you personally, and that may change over time. I encourage you, like I said, as we get into this, not just register what I say, but use that information to formulate questions in your mind that you might want to ask other people, and kind of use that to be like, hey, what should I be considering? What should I do? And don't ever feel that there is one correct choice, because that's false. There's so many differences just studio to studio, let alone person to person. You really just want to kind of get a handle on feeling a little more certain of what seems like it might be comfortable for you. Underdog. You can always find your footing with smaller jobs instead of only aiming for big name studios. It can help to build up work history, acclimate you to the industry, and sometimes ends up being a better job in the long run. Really, it's just stepping stones. You'll hear that term sometime, like stepping stone jobs or ladder rung jobs, where you're like, this may not be my forever home, but this is a job I am taking now that fits me now, where I can learn the skills I need to get to where I'm going. That's totally fine, totally normal. And, in this economy, right, guys, it's probably a good idea to consider what that might look like for you. Because sometimes it's going to be you take the job you can get. Do your research. Be in touch. Don't just apply to places where you have no idea what the pipelines might be like, or that are dealing with methods and industry standards that you are clueless about. You can look into expected methods. This means, like, if you're going to go apply at Blizzard and you're like, I don't know what it means to work on WoW, but man, I really want to work on WoW. A lot of people work on WoW, and probably somebody who works on WoW might be willing to enlighten you as to what that entails. Like, what is a day in the life of a concept artist in previs on WoW? Do you know? If you don't, but you want to know, there's people you can ask. Not everybody's going to respond, and I don't want to put that weight on devs necessarily, but there's also just information available online and interviews and such. And a lot of these people stream on Twitch, and you can just ask questions. Don't try and bog people down with 20 paragraphs, but doing research in this respect just simply means, if you don't know what a pipeline is, if you don't know what these other things are, it's time to start learning. Part of that is this talk here, so well done. Good job, you. Don't expect to be a senior with 0 experience. Don't expect to never do grunt work. Shit talk. Little poop emoji for you. Don't apply for a company you have been bad-mouthing publicly for years. I mean, this will come up later. It should be obvious, but there are so many people that do this. And sometimes they get the job and it's fine, but sometimes you get blacklisted because people are like, oh, that's the guy who's been, gotta want it. If you're only going to talk about how you don't want to work, then ignore the rest of this talk, you're fucked. That's just, it is what it is. You need to actually be willing to work. The industry is not a lazy place to be. Hooray! This is just the beginning. That's chapter 1. We made it. Starting with chapter 2, there will be a Q&A after each section. That was outlined earlier, so let's get into it.